All right. So this week on defining ethics or ethical leadership, um, the text kind of it to me it kind of made ethical leadership as sort of subjective, because it's like based on a lot of ethics are based on like morals and like social norms and stuff like that. And so it seems like it would kind of be like subjective in whatever industry you're in or culture you're in, even country that you're in. But ultimately, I think that you know ethics and morals, I don't know. I have a hard time like separating the two, like something that's ethical and something that's moral. I'm sure they like intertwine a lot, but I don't know.
I,
They might mean the same thing, but I don't know. It's hard. Like I have a hard time kind of like defining the two as different. So like when I think of like a leader that's ethical, it's like also like somebody who's kind of like acting like on morals and like social norms and stuff like that.
well, I think you feel that they're the same. They're the same because they're really like the ethics are the moral principles that guide our behaviors. So they really are kind of linked.
Uh-huh.
Like moral principles guide the behavior, which leads to a certain kind of ethical leadership. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
I think they are absolutely entwined in that way.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. One other thought that I had on the readings, and I know this is kind of separate from what I just said, but like one other thing that I thought of was how, like thinking of an ethical, like an example of an ethical leader, especially today, I feel like social media has made that like much more difficult. Just thinking about like say politics or anything like that, um, social media is like so powerful that like the microscope is so like big into somebody's life that it's really hard to see um, an ethical leader because there's so many people that are so loud in their opinions against them or for them that you get all these mixed messages, and it's really hard to kind of discern like somebody who's like an ethical leader. For me, somebody who's like an ethical leader or not.
That's it's
Yeah.
funny that you say that because I actually my chapter 9 post was completely around Twitter and the use of Twitter and
Yeah.
how I don't believe that any government official should have any kind of use of social media. I mean, that's not your soapbox platform. That's not where you conduct
Sure.
your
Right.
business. There's a certain respect in being in that position, and you can't just get up and let your emotions take over. I mean, that's not what we need. We need the opposite. They say
Yeah.
that women are emotional. I mean, and women can't be leaders. And I don't know. I'm thinking I think it's a two-way street. I mean, emotions like those types of platforms, I mean, they're just not, it makes it so much worse. I mean, it's just everyone's combative. It's just, I don't know. I have a huge opinion about social media. So,
Hmm.
I
I do
think
too.
I think that
Fred, I was just commenting.
Oh,
Yes, I agree.
um, I think technology has actually kind of redefined what we see as ethical and not ethical, and like the use of technology. And I think, like Andrew really highlighted, like we look so much into somebody's life now that like we need to maybe step back and say, okay, is it really ethical? Like, is it really ethical that these people are like tweeting stuff like that? But now we live in such a day and age that it's kind of become like a social norm, like you talked
yeah.
about. So now we have to not only say, okay, are they an ethical person based on their behaviors, but are they an ethical person based on technology and the social media that they use? And I think that plays a huge part in defining what we view as ethical now as opposed to not ethical.
Yeah, that's really good because I think it's kind of like paradoxical, like somebody who's using social media as like their main platform, and they may say things that are positive and things that are negative, and both positive and negative messages just get so blown up that it causes, all these, opposing sides, bumping heads and stuff. But on the other end, Sam, like what you said about how it's becoming a social norm, like I cannot imagine in today's day and age somebody rising up to public leadership, in politics or non-politics, without like having social media as a main force, like, of where they kind of engage their followers. So it's kind of like both, on one end, we're kind of saying like, oh man, it's like social media is like making it so difficult for me, social media is making it difficult to like kind of discern whether somebody's ethical or not, or has integrity or not. But at the other end, it's like if somebody's not on social media, it's kind of like, oh, they kind of don't, they can't influence you the way that other people can, So it's a really like strange time, I feel like.
Mm-hmm.
One of the things that the chapter on public leadership talked about is how like you have to choose your platform and be really careful about your message. And I think that plays into it, because it talked about like you have to be able to get your message out there if you're going to get elected.
Mm-hmm.
So, and in today's day and age, that happens through social media. Like more people are gonna see your message that way, but you have to like those people have to be so careful about putting the right message out that they want to represent them, instead of just being emotionally driven and it can't act like the high school teenagers act on Twitter, right? Like it's you're right, it's quite the conundrum. Like you need it, but you have to be really careful as a public leader, because you are in a fishbowl at that point.
Mm-hmm.
And I think another thing that social media does is we kind of depersonalize it. Like, oh, I see a screen, I just see these typed words. Like, we don't see body language, we don't see facial expressions. Like, is it being sarcastic? Is he trying to be funny? Because words are just words, but if you put it in a different context, like, could it really be ethical if he says this? Well, in this context, yeah, it could be, but not in this context. But we don't have the context being on social media.
Yeah.
Context is so key to what you just said right there. Like anything can be taken out of context and twisted to fit whatever message you want it to. So I could see something and take this little part of it out of context and put it on my page to make it was supporting or not supporting or talking about or not talking about this thing, when really in the context of it, that doesn't really represent them well. But what I said has power because it's social media and it goes out.
Yeah, and I think that kind of going off of that, like the chapter also talked about like, public relations and like the goals of public relations and public leaders, how they go together. Part of that, what's the word I'm looking for? Like ambiguity of the messages, that how they could be taken out of context. Part of the ambiguity is purposeful. It's like they make things vague and, or they can make things vague and, ambiguous, so that it's like this message can be taken this way or it can be taken this way, but that's their goal, because overall it creates force, it creates conversation, and creates like spark, and things go viral, like, so yeah, it's just really crazy how, because this textbook was written in 2013, right? Mm-hmm. So 2013, 4 years ago,
that's huge in
it
technology.
Was a big leap in how somebody can be gain influence and stuff, something like that. And so I think back of remember when the first a couple weeks ago we talked about JFK, how when he ran for president, it was like the first time that it was televised, and so his good looks were part of his influence and stuff like that. And so now, that was like a beginning of an era of television, seeing somebody, and that's when all of the, charisma and body language and all this stuff was so powerful. And now we're in an age of like Twitter, and we're in an age of where all that is gone. And now it's like Sam was saying, it's just words, and, somebody can somebody's learning how to manipulate like just words so that they either can be taken out of context if that's their purpose, or making sure that they're not taken out of context, so it's just really crazy.
It's funny that you mentioned JFK, because I was thinking about him as I was reading the public leadership and the ethical, like the considering like back then how he was portrayed and what we know of his lifestyle now, and you know, being under the fishbowl now that he's not here, and we learned so much about him, and he might not have been considered such an ethical leader through today's understanding of who he was and what he did, but it wasn't known back then. He wasn't in a fishbowl. His administration went to great lengths to hide those things so that the public didn't see it. And you know, one of the things you mentioned, Andrew, at the beginning was how it's so it depends on where your moral values is and how it can change from, you know, depending on your culture, and I think in politics kind of that pertains too, because it depends on at what lengths they go to protect that image, and then me, as I interpret it, maybe my moral interpretation is different than yours. And so I might say, oh, that's his private life and it doesn't matter. And someone else might say, well, yeah, but he's got to be at this moral standard if he's going to set the example for us as America. Yeah. I think it's like this bigger, but back then he wasn't in the fishbowl of social media.
See, like our biggest problem today, though, is consistency. Like we don't have any consistency with leaders. I mean, it's a constant flip flop of what's good for today. You know, what sounds good for today. And with, I mean, ethics, especially, like we don't even have companies that we can trust anymore. You know, I mean, I had written about the bailout of 2008. You know, I lived through that. I worked for Countrywide Bank. I worked for the mortgage industry. I, you know, saw people lose their jobs. I lost my job. You know, I mean, there's so many different, I mean, ethics wise, you're not even in a position to be able to trust your leadership anywhere you go, whether it be in politics or for corporations. It's actually very sad these days.
I agree with you 100%, that it is very sad.
It's sad. I mean, it's across the board. It's not just one industry. It's everywhere. I mean, it's unfortunate. It really is. So,
unfortunately, money drives way more than morals today.
Well, of course, it's the bottom line.
It is.
So, time.
All right. Cool.